There is a piece of graffiti on a wall in Rome. It was scratched there around 200 AD by someone who wanted to humiliate a man named Alexamenos. Alexamenos was a Christian. The graffiti shows him standing with one arm raised in worship. In front of him, nailed to a cross, is a figure with the body of a man and the head of a donkey. Beneath it, in rough Latin, someone wrote, "Alexamenos worships his God." It was meant to be cruel. A joke, something to make Alexamenos's colleagues laugh at him in the street. But what it actually is, without meaning to be, without anyone planning it that way, is the earliest surviving image of Jesus Christ that we can confirm is an image of Jesus Christ. 200 AD, a donkey, no long hair, no calm, angular European face, no white robe, no halo, a donkey's head on a cross, scratched into plaster by someone who thought Christians were ridiculous. That is the first image. Now think about the image you grew up with. Long hair to the shoulders, a neat beard, pale, almost luminous skin, eyes that are light, blue or a soft brown, a face that is symmetrical and composed and, in its way, beautiful. You have seen that image in churches, in paintings, in films, on the walls of schools and hospitals, and your grandmother's kitchen. That image is so familiar, it has stopped feeling like a choice. It feels like a fact. It is not a fact. It is a decision, made by a specific man, in a specific year, for reasons that had nothing to do with history and everything to do with power. And the documents that described something different, documents that existed before that decision was made and circulated for centuries in early Christian communities, were not destroyed. They were simply never put in front of you. Tonight, we are going to read them. The silence in the Gospels. Here is the thing that should stop you. The four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do not describe the physical appearance of Jesus. Not once. Not the color of his hair. Not the color of his eyes. Not his height, or his build, or the shape of his face. The men who wrote the foundational texts of the Christian faith, texts that have been copied, translated, argued over, and read aloud in every language on earth for 2,000 years, never once thought it necessary to tell you what Jesus looked like. Think about what that silence means. You have been shown a detailed image of Jesus your entire life. You have been shown it so many times, in so many places, that it has become involuntary. The moment someone says the name, the image appears, fully formed, specific. That image did not come from the Gospels. The Gospels are empty on this question, completely, deliberately, strangely empty. So where did the image come from? To answer that, you need to start with a different question. What did the earliest Christians actually say? What the early texts say. The Acts of John is one of the oldest surviving non-canonical Christian texts. Scholars date it to approximately 150 AD. It circulated widely in early Christian communities for over 2 centuries. Clement of Alexandria, one of the most important theologians of the early church, quoted from it. Eusebius, the first historian of Christianity, knew of it. It was not obscure. It was not a fringe document found in a single crumbling manuscript. It was read. It was used. It was, for a significant part of the early church, scripture. And what it says about the appearance of Jesus has never been read to you from a pulpit. The author, who writes as John the Apostle, describes the first time he saw Jesus on the shore. He says he turned to his brother James and asked, "Who is that man?" James said, "I see an old man with white hair." John looked back at Jesus and saw a young man whose beard had barely grown. The same person, The same moment. Two people standing side by side. Two completely different appearances. John describes seeing Jesus again on another occasion. He says he saw a small man. Ugly. That word, ugly, is not a translation problem. The Greek is clear. The word means physically unattractive, unglamorous, the opposite of the composed, beautiful face that has been painted onto ceilings and altarpieces and book covers for 1,000 years. And then John describes reaching out to touch Jesus, and sometimes his hand passed through what should have been a solid body, and sometimes it didn't. And he never knew, before he reached, which it would be. This is the earliest substantial account we have of what Jesus looked like. It is not consistent. It is not beautiful. And in 325 AD, at the Council of Nicaea, the bishops of the early church voted to exclude the Acts of John from the canon. They did not exclude it because nobody had heard of it. They excluded it because everyone had. The Forgery. At some point in the medieval period, the exact date is unknown, someone sat down and wrote a letter. The letter claimed to be an official report sent by a Roman governor named Publius Lentulus to the Roman Senate. Lentulus wrote that he had encountered, in his province of Judea, a man of remarkable appearance. He wanted the Senate to know what this man looked like. He wrote, "He is a tall man, well-shaped, and of an amiable and reverend aspect. His hair is of a color that can hardly be compared to that of a hazelnut in its full ripeness, plain to his ears, from whence downwards it is more glossy and curling, waving about his shoulders. Long hair, a beard of the same color, serene eyes, an upright bearing." The letter circulated. It was copied into manuscripts. It was read in monasteries and universities. It was treated as evidence, as documentation, as the eyewitness account that the four canonical Gospels had never provided. It became, quietly and without any single moment of official endorsement, the default physical description of Jesus in Western Christianity. The long hair in every painting you have ever seen, the beard, the composure, all of it traces back to this letter. There was no Publius Lentulus. Scholars established this definitively in the 15th century. The Latin is medieval, not classical. The administrative title Lentulus uses for his position did not exist in 1st century Roman governance. There is no record of this man in any census, administrative document, or historical account from the period. Someone invented him. Someone, whose name we do not know, whose motivation we can only infer, who may have believed they were serving a holy purpose, or may have known exactly what they were doing, invented a Roman official, gave him a name, put him in Judea, and placed a physical description of Jesus in his mouth. We do not know who wrote it, we only know what it did. It shaped every image of Jesus painted in Western Europe for 600 years. The coin Justinian II is 22 years old when he becomes emperor. The year is 685 AD. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern successor of Rome, the empire that has called itself Christian for 3.5 centuries, is in crisis. It has just suffered a catastrophic military defeat against the Islamic Caliphate. Territory is lost. The treasury is strained. The religious unity that Constantine had used to hold the empire together is fracturing along doctrinal lines that no one has fully resolved. Justinian II needs a symbol. He needs something that says, "This empire is Christian, its power is legitimate, its authority is divine." In 692, he calls a council. 302 bishops gather in Constantinople. The meeting is called the Quinisext Council, the Council in Trullo. It will produce 102 canons governing the practice and appearance of the Christian faith. Canon 82 is the one that concerns us. Canon 82 states that Jesus must no longer be depicted as a lamb, the symbol the early church had used for 3 centuries. From this point forward, he must be depicted in human form. Specifically, as a bearded man with long hair. Not because any document supported this. Not because any living person remembered what he looked like. Not because the council had access to evidence the rest of the church did not. Because Justinian II needed a face. And so a coin maker sat down in Constantinople and engraved one. The coins of Byzantium had always carried the emperor's portrait on one side. In 692, Justinian II mints a new issue. On one side, his own face. On the other side, a long-haired, bearded man with a halo and solemn, forward-facing eyes. It is the first official image of Jesus Christ in the history of the world, struck in gold, circulated across the empire, put into the hands of every merchant, soldier, tax collector, and peasant from Constantinople to the edges of the known world. That face, designed by an engraver, authorized by a 22-year-old emperor who needed a political symbol, is the image that every painter, every sculptor, every filmmaker, every Sunday school teacher would inherit as the true and settled appearance of Jesus. For 13 centuries. And counting. What the evidence actually shows. In 2001, a forensic anthropologist named Richard Neave published a reconstruction. Neave had spent decades reconstructing faces from bone, criminals, historical figures, unidentified remains. He was, by the time he turned his attention to this project, one of the most respected facial reconstruction specialists in the world. The question he was trying to answer was simple. Not, what did Jesus look like specifically? No forensic reconstruction can answer that. You need the actual skull. What did a typical Galilean Jewish man look like in the 1st century of the Common Era? Neave worked from skulls excavated from the Galilee region, dated to the relevant period, examined using the techniques his field had developed over 50 years. His team mapped the bone structure. They calculated the likely muscle mass. They used the archaeological record, hair samples, textiles, imagery from the period, to determine what men in that region looked like at that time. The result was published in a peer-reviewed journal. It was covered by the BBC. It is, to this day, the most scientifically rigorous answer we have to this question. The face is broad, the skin is dark, darker than any image in the Western artistic tradition. The skin of a man who worked outdoors in the Middle Eastern sun. The hair is short, dark, tightly curled, not flowing to the shoulders, not the Lentulus Letter, not the Byzantine coin, a man from the Galilee, a man who would have looked to Roman eyes like a subject, like an occupied native, like someone without power, not like the face on the coin, not like the face on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, not like any of the faces you have ever been shown. Why it matters here is the question you are allowed to ask. Does it matter what Jesus looked like? In the purely theological sense, no. The teachings attributed to him do not depend on his physical appearance. The content of the Sermon on the Mount is the same, regardless of the color of his eyes. But here is the thing that the image did that pure theology cannot account for. The face on Justinian's coin did not just give Jesus a physical appearance, it gave him an identity, a Byzantine identity, a Greek identity, the identity of the people who were running the empire that used his name to justify their power. It made him look like someone who belonged to the world of emperors and councils and gold currency. And in doing so, it quietly and completely severed him from the world he actually came from. A 1st century Jewish man. From Galilee. From the rural north of an occupied territory. A man whose people had been under Roman rule for the entirety of his lifetime. A man who would have looked to any Roman administrator like exactly the kind of person Canon 82 was designed to erase. Think about what the Acts of John was describing. A Jesus who appeared differently to different people. A Jesus who was sometimes small and unremarkable. A Jesus who was, by one account, ugly. That Jesus, the one who looked different depending on who was looking, could not be put on a coin. You cannot build an empire around a face that changes. So they chose a face that didn't. And they buried the texts that described everything else. They did not burn them all. Some survived in libraries. Some were copied by monks who understood what they were preserving. Some were buried in clay jars in the Egyptian desert by communities who knew what was coming and wanted to save what they could. But they were removed from the version of Christianity that was handed to every generation that came after, including yours. The graffiti on the wall in Rome is still there. You can see it in photographs. A rough drawing, a donkey's head on a cross, a man named Alexamenos with his arm raised in worship. It was drawn by someone who wanted to humiliate a Christian. It survived because nobody thought it was important enough to erase. The documents that took it seriously, that tried to describe, carefully and specifically, what Jesus actually looked like to the people who believed they had seen him. Those were the ones that had to be buried. The Acts of John, the Lentulus Letter, the coin of Justinian II, all of it, every piece of evidence we have looked at tonight, describes what Jesus looked like from the outside. But there is one document we have not discussed, found in the same collection as the Acts of John, buried in the same desert, suppressed by the same councils. It doesn't describe the outside of Jesus. It describes what he said after the resurrection, not to Peter, not to any of the 12, to a woman, alone, in private. And what he told her was not a doctrine or a hierarchy or a set of rules. It was a complete, specific, step-by-step account of what happens to the soul after it leaves the body, where it goes, what it faces, what it must say to pass through. That document was sitting in a Berlin museum unread for 59 years. That is the next video. Comment trigger.